On June 6, 1944, at 5:42 a.m., Private First Class Elias Thorn, 2nd Ranger Battalion, received a coded order, Echo, infiltrate the German rear at Vierville-sur-Mer and destroy the artillery coordination radio station. At 7:18, all communication was lost. Simultaneously, the German radio station was destroyed, but a strange signal was broadcast from the same coordinates, Echo secured, Friendlies compromised. The Morse code message was erased from campaign records within hours. 2 days later, Elias Thorn's name was added to the MIA, Missing in Action list. His file was classified and removed from military records. In April 1991, a group of French workers discovered a collapsed concrete bunker near Omaha Beach. Inside, they found an M1 Carbine wrapped in waterproof cloth, serial number intact. Carved deeply into the wooden stock was the inscription, "Do not trust command." The rifle, almost rust-free, was coated in standard U.S. military preservative oil, used only after 1946. It appeared someone returned to the bunker 2 years after the war to store it. Local police handed the evidence to the U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps in Paris. Forensics confirmed it was Elias Thorn's weapon, a U.S. Army Ranger missing since D-Day. An AFP news brief on May 16, 1991, stated, "Mysterious U.S. rifle found in Normandy, belonging to a Ranger lost during the invasion." That same day, the U.S. Veterans Administration sent a letter to Orin Thorn, Elias's grandson, a former military policeman turned private detective in Indianapolis, requesting his presence in Paris to retrieve the evidence. At the U.S. Embassy, Orin was given the M1 Carbine in a sealed case. Inside the case lid was a pasted note, "Property of R-17, Echo Directive." No record of R-17 existed in any unit listings from Normandy. A supplemental forensic report concluded, fingerprints on the rifle's bolt belonged to 2 individuals, Elias Thorn and an unidentified person. What made the case perplexing, a rifle belonging to a soldier missing since 1944 was preserved with a process only used post-war, found in a bunker absent from military maps, tied to an untraceable code. 47 years after Elias Thorn vanished, the sole clue to his existence resurfaced, hinting at a secret far beyond what anyone had imagined. Orin Thorn signed for the M1 Carbine at the U.S. Embassy in Paris on the afternoon of May 25, 1991. The sealed case was opened in the presence of a military attaché and a forensic officer. The rifle stock was polished, rust-free, with a small metal tag inside engraved, R-17 Echo Division. No one in the room could identify the unit code. When Orin asked, the attaché replied curtly, "Not listed in D-Day campaign records. Possibly an OSS detachment." Orin kept a copy of the forensic report. Fingerprints from the rifle's bolt matched Elias Thorn and a second individual, Colonel James Rains, OSS Field Operations, present in Normandy in June 1944. Rains's fingerprints should not have been on a Ranger private's weapon. After leaving the embassy, Orin was asked to sign a liability waiver related to evidence with security implications. Marcel Fournier, the French archive clerk, met him in the lobby and handed him a small brown envelope, saying quickly, "I reviewed the excavation report. The bunker where the rifle was found was sealed by American soldiers in August 1944, not Germans. They brought explosives, welded the entrance shut, and left. No record in any construction logs." Orin asked who led the sealing team. Fournier replied, "No name, just the code R-17. That evening, Orin returned to his hotel on Rue Saint-Honoré. As he opened the door, the phone rang. No one was on the line, just silence for a few seconds, then an elderly man's voice, raspy, as if through a compressed device, "Don't ask about R-17. The last person who did never left Paris." The line cut off abruptly, leaving a long dial tone. Orin set the receiver down and stepped to the window. Below, a black Renault idled across from the hotel, engine running. He noted the license plate, but the car sped off as he drew the curtain. That night, Orin visited the National Library to check OSS unit records. Echo Division did not exist. However, in a classified catalog, a locked file titled Special Directive, Valkyrie was listed. A marginal note read, "Field Agent, Thorn Elias Classification R-17, Oversight, Colonel Rains." No further details, only a status, sealed National Security Order. The next morning, Orin contacted the U.S. Army to request a copy of Elias's service record for a civilian investigation. The automated system responded, "Record not found." 10 minutes later, his voicemail received a new message, "Cease requests." Thorn's file was destroyed in 1952. All further access will be reported. No name, no callback number. Back at the hotel, Orin inspected the M1 closely. On the safety catch was a faint circular engraving, an omega with a 7 inside. Under the oil, the mark was deep, not a factory symbol. He photographed it and sent it to a former military police colleague who specialized in wartime evidence. 2 hours later, a fax arrived. This mark was used in the OSS Omega program, a counterintelligence unit in Europe, disbanded in 1946. Last commander, Colonel James Rains. The matching details confirmed one thing: Elias Thorn was directly linked to Rains, but not through standard command. Rangers didn't report to OSS unless on special missions. Rains didn't just know Elias, he had handled his weapon. Orin met Fournier again to ask about the excavation records. Fournier said, "When we opened the bunker, there was a steel seal stamped with OSS. The sand inside held no bones, no other artifacts. The bunker was used to store something, not people." He paused, looked around, and lowered his voice. "Americans came here in 1944 to bury something they didn't want found. Not German, not ours. The only thing left was that rifle." That evening, as Orin left a cafe near Place Madeleine, he saw the black Renault parked in the same spot. This time, the engine was off. The window was cracked a few centimeters. Streetlight reflected off a handheld radio scanner, a 1970s-era intercept device. As Orin approached, the car roared to life and sped off, leaving a note tucked under the windshield wiper. Echo Division never existed. Forget R-17. Back in his room, Orin turned on the light and spread the files on the table. Rains's fingerprints, R-17 code, Echo Directive, 1946, oil, sealed bunker, the threat, all pointed to one source, OSS. The phrase Special Directive, Valkyrie stood out in his memory. Orin didn't know what Valkyrie was, but the remnants of his grandfather's disappearance suggested it wasn't a failed mission, it was a deliberate cover-up. On May 31, 1991, Orin Thorn returned to Washington, D.C., carrying copies of Rains' fingerprints and a photo of the Omega 7 mark on the M1 Carbine. At the National Archives, he requested access to Private First Class Elias Thorn's file, serial number 421931944. The file was delivered in a sealed envelope, but when opened, it contained only 11 loose pages, mostly administrative forms, supply requisitions, and a missing in-action certificate. All combat reports and post-war records were removed. At the end was a single typed sheet from an old typewriter, the 7th of June 1944. Agent Thorn compromised. Order Echo extraction suspended. Contain exposure. No signature, just an OSS embossed seal. Orin asked the duty archivist. The elderly man checked his screen, then shook his head. No microfilm copy. This file was removed from storage in 1950, under special order, recipient listed as Sector 7. When Orin asked, "Who is R?" the man whispered, "Rains ran OSS Sector 7. They called him the cleaner. When someone in the war knew too much, Rains handled it." Orin paused for a moment. The old man glanced around, then pulled a handwritten address from a drawer. Colonel John Mercer, Arlington, Virginia. He was a logistics officer in Normandy. "Might have met Rains," the archivist whispered. "But I'd advise you, if you ask about this, do it quickly." That afternoon, Orin drove to the address. Colonel John Mercer, 82, lived in a small suburban house with a "No Visitors" sign on the gate. After showing credentials, Mercer reluctantly let Orin in. The walls were covered with Operation Overlord maps. When Orin mentioned Elias Thorn, Mercer went silent, then said, "I remember. He was one of the Rangers detached to work with OSS. I signed their weapon requisitions." The next day, Rains ordered all Vierville logistics logs destroyed. I asked why. He just said, "Echo Division doesn't exist." Orin showed the memo from the file. Mercer read it, his face paling. "I've seen contain exposures used only once, when a witness saw something that couldn't be allowed to exist. Thorn saw something in Normandy that Rains couldn't let get out." Orin asked directly, "What?" Mercer looked at him. "A deal with the Germans." A group of OSS officers met Wehrmacht representatives before the campaign ended. They wanted radar files and jet weapon data to bargain with post-war. Thorn found out. You know what happened next? Mercer paused, poured a drink, his voice lowering. I reported the irregularity. 3 days later, Rains personally signed my discharge order and vanished from public records. Rumor was he moved to Operation Paperclip. He stressed each word. If you dig deeper, you'll cross people who still have power. They don't want Rains's name mentioned. Orin left Mercer's house at 7:40 p.m. Before he got in his car, the old man said, "Thorn wasn't killed by Germans. He was taken out by our own." That night, back at his DC hotel, the phone rang repeatedly. No one was on the line, just breathing and the sound of metal scraping. Orin unplugged it and logged the call numbers. The next morning, local news reported, former Army colonel dies in Arlington crash. Mercer's Buick had veered off an overpass, crashing onto train tracks. Orin visited the scene with a police contact. Initial report, loss of control due to a skid, but the guardrail bore clean cuts, like from a metal saw. Orin quietly requested a copy of the coroner's report. 2 days later, it confirmed brake lines were severed with a precision tool, professional cut, no signs of struggle, no foreign footprints. Conclusion: accident due to mechanical failure. Orin returned to his hotel, laying the memo next to Rains' fingerprint photo. On June 7, 1944, 24 hours after Elias lost contact, OSS issued the contain exposure order. Nearly half a century later, the last living person who knew about Rains in Normandy died with cut brakes. All leads pointed to one name. Before leaving Washington, Orin returned to the National Archives to ask about Sector 7. The old archivist was gone, replaced by someone who said he'd taken sudden leave. No reason given. In Orin's document pickup slot was a new envelope, no sender listed. Inside was a black and white photo from Normandy, June 1944. 4 men in U.S. uniforms, by a jeep. Elias Thorn and Colonel Rains among them. On the back, in faint pencil, Echo was never German territory. As Orin left the building, he scanned the area, feeling watched. A black Lincoln parked 2 rows from the main gate, tinted windows, no diplomatic plates. As he crossed the street, the car started and rolled slowly in the opposite direction. Orin didn't look back. In his pocket, the crumpled memo's last 3 words stood out on yellowed paper: contain the exposure. Orin Thorn landed in Keene on a foggy morning, carrying the photo of Elias Thorn standing next to Colonel Rains. 47 years earlier, this place had been a bloodbath. He headed to Vierville-sur-Mer, following the address from Marcel Fournier, who had mentioned a former resistance fighter, Luc Durand, 89, the last living witness near the Echo bunker. Luc's house sat by the seawall. When Orin showed the photo, the old man recognized the face immediately. "Yes, that's him," Luc said in a hoarse but firm voice. Thin beard, bright eyes, spoke decent French. "We called him Le Ranger Americain." He paused, his trembling finger pointing to the man on the right. "But this one wasn't his soldier. We saw him in the same uniform days earlier, with a British officer and 2 Americans, in an OSS-marked vehicle." Luc recounted that on June 7, 1944, while scouting along D-517, he saw 4 Americans escorting a man with bound hands. The bound man was Thorn. "Not Nazis, your people. They wore blank patches, no unit numbers, guns without serials. I thought they'd grabbed the wrong prisoner, but they headed north, to a small bunker near the woods. No one saw them return." Luc's eyes drifted. 2 days later, that place exploded. "We thought it was an old bomb, but there were no bomb fragments." Orin asked if Luc had evidence beyond memory. Luc nodded, pulling an old envelope from a drawer. Inside was a black and white photo taken at night. Elias with 3 strangers in a base courtyard. One wore an OSS badge on his shoulder, clear in the flash. "I took this on June 6, Luc said. "We were hiding in a shed, saw them talking to Rains. Then Thorn left alone, and the others got in a jeep. I never saw him again." Orin studied the photo. Behind Elias was a curved steel door, the Echo bunker. On the wall was a triangular mark, with the number 7, matching the engraving on the M1 Carbine. He asked Luc where the bunker was now. The old man pointed north. "It's still there, buried but not fully collapsed. You can reach it if you know the way." 3 hours later, Orin and Luc drove to the old site, a grassy slope overlooking the sea. The 1991 archaeology team had dug here, but the bunker entrance was covered again. Under the soil, Orin found tank tracks and steel drag marks, like a large container had been moved. Prying away broken bricks with a crowbar, he uncovered a small partially rusted steel box. Inside was an old radio reel, wrapped in moldy oilcloth. Luc looked around, tense. "I'm telling you, someone doesn't want you finding this," he whispered. 2 years ago, an Englishman came asking about Echo. A week later, his car was found burned out on the highway. Orin wrapped the reel in his jacket, thanked Luke and left. He drove toward Keene. The road was empty, except for a black Jeep tailing at a distance. As Orin turned onto a hill, an explosion tore through the air behind him. He slammed the brakes, checking the mirror. The Jeep was engulfed in flames, flipped on its side, fire roaring. No one emerged. He didn't stop. In Keene, Orin gave the reel to a local audio technician for restoration. The tape, less than 10 minutes long, started with static and interference, then a gasping American voice. "Mission complete. Target destroyed. Radio down." A pause, then friendly fire. "Not German. Repeat. Not German." The voice cut off, followed by a thud, then silence. The technician asked, "Want copies? This could degrade with more plays." Orin nodded, requesting 3. He knew he'd just heard direct evidence that Elias Thorn wasn't killed by Germans, but attacked by Allies. That night, in his Keene hotel, Orin compared Luke's photo to Raines's military file. The man beside Elias with the OSS badge was Raines. The voice on the tape, analyzed for frequency and tone, matched a 1945 speech by Raines archived at the Pentagon. The next morning, Luke called the hotel. "A stranger asked about you," he said curtly. "Showed a U.S. Veterans Affairs badge. I don't think they're here to help." Orin told him to lock his doors and leave for a few days. Luke gave a dry laugh. "I survived the Gestapo. These guys don't scare me." Before hanging up, Luke added a chilling detail. "You know, when they took Thorn, he was still alive. He looked right at me, like he wanted to say something. I didn't get it then, but I do now." He knew they weren't there to save him. Orin sat in silence, staring at the spinning tape. Elias's final words played again through the speaker. "Friendly fire, not German." This was no longer a theory. Elias Thorn had been taken by American forces, and someone returned to bury the evidence, and him. Orin Thorn returned to Paris 3 days after the explosion in Keene, carrying the original tape wrapped in an anti-static bag. He arranged to meet Philippe Caron, an audio restoration expert who had worked with international police on decoding wartime recordings. Caron listened to the tape once, then turned off the machine and faced Orin. "This isn't a civilian radio signal. It was broadcast on an Allied military frequency, 4.2 MHz band. Whoever recorded it likely used German interception equipment, but the original signal is American." Orin requested a full spectrum analysis. After 6 hours, Caron returned to the studio, handing him a detailed printout of the audio waves. "There are 2 signal layers," he explained. "One is the transmission from the man you call Thorn. The other is an intercept, broadcast on the same frequency, milliseconds later. It's not from the Germans. The interference pattern is typical of an Allied transmission station." He pointed to the graph. "Here, when he says friendly fire, there's an immediate signal cut, a remote control system, only possible from a high-level American station." Caron cleaned the audio. In the background noise, another voice emerged, low and clear, interspersed between the 2 segments. "Directive R-17 approved. Eliminate witness." The echo was cold, like a command read from a control microphone. Caron stopped the tape and asked, "Do you know what R-17 means?" Orin replied curtly, "Now I do." He requested the original be backed up into 4 copies, each with a unique identifier. Caron packaged them carefully, warning him, "If this is a military tape, you're holding something no one wants seen." Leaving the studio, Orin stopped at a cafe near St. Lazare station. His laptop received an email with no sender, only a subject line. "Echo Directive, buried under Fort Raines." The body was empty, but there was an attachment, a black and white satellite image with coordinates of an old military base in Maryland. Below the image, a small note, "Former OSS training site, restricted since 1946. The name Fort Raines chilled him. It was no coincidence. Raines, the man whose fingerprints were on the M1 Carbine, who once commanded OSS Sector 7 and now tied to a training facility, still guarded half a century later. Orin sent the file to an old colleague in the military police. An hour later, his phone rang. Fort Raines is now a signal technology research site under the Department of Defense. It's not public. No one's been allowed in since 1947. "Do you know who established that base?" Orin asked. The line went silent for a few seconds before the reply. General Elias Rains. He died in 1972, but his system is still maintained. That same day, Orin received a voice analysis report from Caron, comparing the Directive R17 approved sample to a 1945 speech by Rains. The match was 94%. The commanding voice on the tape was Major Elias Rains. Orin pieced it together. Elias Thorn's signal was cut off during a mission report. The intercept came from an Allied station. The order to eliminate witness was issued by Rains himself, and minutes later, Elias vanished. That evening, he met Marcel Fournier again in Paris. Fournier listened to a copy of the tape for a few seconds, then whispered, "R17 isn't just a directive code. It was a covert OSS unit, Regulator 17. They handled internal cases of potential information leaks. If Rains gave that order, it means Thorn was marked for handling." Orin asked if there were any records on Regulator 17. Fournier sighed, "Not on paper, but Fort Rains was their training camp. After the war, it was renamed 3 times, but locals still call it the Silent Fort. Most who worked there either vanished or were transferred overseas." He immediately contacted a contact at the U.S. Veterans Affairs Department, requesting access to Rains' records. The system sent back a blurry PDF with a single summary line. Elias Rains, Major OSS Field Operations, 1942 to 1945. Assigned Sector 7, designation R17. Authorized for Directive Echo Containment, June 1944. Under status, deceased. National Honors, 1972. A final note in italics. All directives under R17 transferred to Department of Defense Signal Operations. Access restricted. Orin shut the laptop, looking out the window. A black car was parked across the cafe, 2 men inside unmoving. He pulled out his phone, snapped a picture of the license plate, and sent it to his colleague in Washington. 10 minutes later, a brief reply. Vehicle belongs to the Department of Defense, not civilian registered. Late that night, he opened a digital map and searched for Fort Rains. The base was deep in northern Maryland's forests, removed from public maps since the 1960s. Satellite imagery showed electrified fencing, 2 administrative buildings, and a small airstrip. Near the main gate was a warehouse marked E7, matching the designation in the Normandy photograph. He emailed Caron, "If I don't contact you in 48 hours, give the original to the press." Caron replied with one line, "I hope you know what you're doing." Before leaving Paris, Orin reviewed the voice analysis one last time. In the tape's final segment, cleared of static, Thorn's faint voice emerged, "Mission complete. Echo Directive, Y stop signal, we're still in field." Then immediately after, another voice, low and firm, "Directive R17, approved. Eliminate witness." After that, the signal cut off entirely. No further transmissions from Elias Thorn's team followed. All Orin held now, the tape, Rains' fingerprints, the R17 code, Fort Rains, pointed to a chain of events erased from history. An OSS officer had ordered the elimination of his own ranger, then covered it up as a disappearance after the war. And in national records, the man named Rains was still listed as a hero who protected U.S. military secrets. Luc Durand contacted Orin 2 days after he left Paris. His voice was hoarse over the phone. "I remembered a name, Owen Hale. He was Thorn's teammate. They served together in the 2nd Ranger Battalion. Hale died after the war ended, but some say it wasn't from old age." Orin immediately returned to Normandy. Luc led him to the American military cemetery at Vierville-sur-Mer, where thousands of white gravestones stretched toward the sea. On the 13th row, a headstone bore the name Sergeant Owen Hale, Ranger Battalion, KIA 1946. The date of death, 2 years after D-Day, was unusual for a European front ranger. Luc whispered. He came back to France after the war, stayed only a few weeks, then died in a car accident. But locals said 2 men in civilian clothes visited him the night before. Orin swept the grave's base with a metal detector. A signal pinged at the right corner, about 20 centimeters from the headstone. Digging with a small shovel, he hit a small steel tube coated in rust-proof oil, its ends welded shut. Inside was a leather-bound notebook, pocket-sized, with faded but legible handwriting. On the first page, a scrawled note, "If I don't return, give this to Margaret Thorn, Elias's wife's name." The next page, dated June 8, 1944. Thorn completed the mission at Vierville, Radio station destroyed, but he said he saw something wrong. American soldiers in the German sector, talking to a Wehrmacht officer, he mentioned Rains. Last night I saw Rains leave the base with 2 strangers, no insignias. This morning, Thorn was called for questioning. By afternoon, they called him a traitor. I don't believe it. The following pages were short entries, mixed with symbols and coordinates. Hale had sketched a diagram of radio station 43, marking a symbol R7, Echo Bunker, not German held. Next to it he added, cleared out, no one allowed to mention it. Orin cross-referenced a 1944 Normandy battlefield map. The R7 coordinates matched the exact location where the M1 Carbine was found. Hale had marked the bunker where Elias was buried. The final page had only a few shaky pencil lines. Rains met Germans at Station 43. Thorn overheard was taken. They called him a traitor. I saw their vehicle head toward Echo. Never returned. I have to hide this. They'll come for me. Orin noticed the ink on the last page was a different shade. It seemed someone had handled it later. Using a UV light, he found a faint fingerprint in the page's corner. He photographed it and sent it to his old forensics contact in Washington, with a note, match against federal database. While awaiting a response, Luke added, Hale stayed in France after the war, said he wanted to find the truth for a friend. 3 weeks later, he was dead. A local reporter said the body had neck bruises, but the official report listed only a head injury. Orin nodded. It fit the pattern of those who dared mention Rains. That evening, the forensics result came back. A single-line message, fingerprint on the last page, matches Jonathan Keene, CIA agent, currently with the National Security Archives Division. Orin read it twice, certain of no mistake. Keene had been an analyst tasked with handling declassified OSS records in the 1970s. He had access to all of Rains' files and Directive R17. Orin contacted Washington again. The line went silent for a few seconds, then switched to an automated female voice. This number is no longer active. He checked Keene's public record, listed as retired 1989, missing since March 1990, during a European assignment. Yet a fingerprint from a man missing less than 2 years ago appeared on a notebook buried under a soldier's grave since 1946. He sent a copy of the diary to Karen in Paris for digitization. As the scanner captured the text, Karen noticed something else. Between the lines were short-coded symbols, 3 characters repeating R, the same symbol etched on the M1 Carbine. No doubt remained. Everything pointed to the Echo Bunker, where Rains had command. Luke stayed silent as Orin shared the findings. He spoke slowly. If this is true, Hale's death wasn't an accident. Someone came here, dug up the grave, took the notebook, and put it back. The last person to touch it was your agent. Orin nodded. Keene likely found evidence, and was eliminated, just like Mercer. He decided to keep the notebook in the hotel safe, carrying only copies. Leaving the cemetery, Luke asked, "What will you do with it?" Orin replied, "Prove Thorn didn't disappear. He was taken, and the people behind it are still alive." That night, a package was left at his hotel room door. No sender's address, just a typed note. "Don't open the notebook again if you want to leave Normandy alive." Inside the envelope was a photo of Orin at the cemetery that morning, taken from a distance through a telephoto lens. Someone was watching his every move. He took the photo to the hotel reception. The clerk confirmed no strangers were seen. Orin called Luke, but there was no answer. He tried again. A different woman's voice answered curtly, "Mr. Duran cannot take calls. This is the police. There's been an incident." The call cut off abruptly. He looked at the notebook again. The phrase "not German held" stood out under the desk lamp. Hale had written the truth. The area where Thorn vanished was never under German control. They had staged it to cover up an operation of their own. And now, over 40 years later, anyone who touched that truth was disappearing, just as Elias Thorn had been erased from Normandy's map in 1944. The next morning, Orin couldn't reach Luke Durand. The first call cut off mid-ring. The second only picked up sounds of impact and labored breathing. He rushed to Luke's hotel in Central Bayou. The room's door was broken, belongings scattered. Luke lay on the floor, face bruised, head bloodied but conscious. Seeing Orin, he struggled to speak. "They know, they're watching both of us." Orin helped him to a chair. "Who?" Luke's voice was halting. "2 Americans, no insignias. I asked what they wanted. They just said, R-17 is still active. One searched the room, the other threatened me. He looked at Orin, eyes still sharp. They weren't after money. They wanted the notebook. I hid it. Orin checked the hallway. At the corridor's end, a man in a black coat stepped out of the elevator, hurrying toward the main exit. Orin gave chase. When the man noticed, he bolted across the street, slipping into an alley behind the hotel. Orin drew his backup pistol, following to a parking lot, but the figure vanished among the cars. On the ground, something had been dropped. A military ID card. The card was old, plastic worn, printed with David Lang, Department of Defense, Security Branch. The photo matched the man's face. Lang was a DoD employee, not a random tourist. Orin returned to the hotel, finding Luke struggling to open an old leather suitcase. Inside wasn't clothing, but a thick oilskin envelope, sealed, labeled in English, to be delivered to the grandson of Elias Thorn. Luke's hands trembled as he handed it to Orin. "I've kept this for over 40 years. An American left it. Said if anyone named Thorn came to Normandy, give it to them directly." Orin opened the envelope. Inside were 3 black and white photos from a 1944 meeting. American and British officers, plus 2 men in civilian clothes, around a map table. In the center was Colonel Rains, leaning to speak with a British officer. Under the table, clearly visible, was a large envelope with handwritten text, "E. Thorn Evidence." The back of the photo had a faint caption, "Taken at OSS Temporary HQ, June 5, 1944, by Field Camera Unit Confidential." Orin studied the image's corner. In a mirror behind, Elias Thorn was visible, holding a camera, capturing that very moment. He realized something critical. Elias wasn't just part of the Echo operation. He had photographed a classified meeting, where Rains spoke with a British officer, just before D-Day, and the E. Thorn Evidence envelope proved he'd submitted those photos to his superiors before losing contact. Luke whispered, "I heard rumors. A group from OSS and British intelligence met in Normandy to negotiate over German military documents. Afterward, an American was mistakenly captured. It might have been Thorn." Orin asked, "Who gave you this envelope?" Luke sighed, "An American named Keene. He came in 1978, said he'd been with the CIA, asked me to hold it because R-17's people might still be active." The name jolted Orin. Jonathan Keene, the man whose fingerprint was in Hale's notebook. He photographed the images, sending copies to Washington via encrypted channels. Then they decided to leave the hotel, but at the lobby, the receptionist said, "2 men just asked for Mr. Duran's room. They said they were old friends from America." Orin scanned the lobby, spotting a man pretending to read a newspaper. He approached, but the man folded the paper and left. Orin followed, but the man jumped into a black Peugeot and sped off. Orin turned back, telling Luke quickly, "We need to split up. You leave town, I'll keep the documents." Luke nodded, but before going, he handed Orin a small folded paper. "Keene also asked me to keep this. I don't know what it is." Orin opened it. Inside was a tiny negative film strip, finger-sized, with 4 consecutive frames. Under a light, he saw Elias Thorn being escorted from a medical tent, surrounded by American soldiers, without insignias. One was Rains, staring directly at the camera. The photos were taken from a distance, possibly by Hale, or even Keene later. That evening, as Orin prepared to send all the data to Karen in Paris for safekeeping, his phone rang. A man's voice, speaking standard English, unidentified. "Mr. Thorn, don't send those photos anywhere. Let us retrieve them. People have died for those pictures." Orin asked, "Who are you?" The line paused for a few seconds. "Then we're on the same side, but you're digging into something that shouldn't be reopened. R-17 ended the war, but at a cost. Elias paid that price. You don't want to follow." Before Orin could respond, the call cut off. He traced the number. It didn't exist in civilian systems. Returning to Luke's room, he found the suitcase open, papers strewn across the table. Luke sat motionless, eyes distant. "They took all the originals," he said softly. "Only the copies you have remain." Orin knew this wasn't a warning. They were erasing the last traces of the 1944 incident, from Hale to Keene, to now Durand. But the old man hadn't given up. Before the police arrived, Luke whispered, "I heard one of them mention Fort Rains. The original photos might still be there." Elias wasn't foolish. He must have kept copies of the evidence. The police took Luke to the hospital. Orin stayed, gathering what remained: 3 photos, the film strip, and the handwritten Thorn evidence note. He noticed a small mark on the envelope's corner, 27, the same code again. That night, he re-examined the meeting photo. Under Rain's shadow, among the British officers, was a radio marked R-17. Elias had unintentionally captured evidence of a secret meeting between Rain's British intelligence and possibly German representatives. That moment had led to his signal being cut, his branding as a traitor, and nearly half a century later, anyone touching those photos was still being hunted. June 7, 1944, Normandy. The sky was still thick with smoke after the invasion. Private First Class Elias Thorn, 2nd Ranger Battalion, crawled through a muddy trench toward Radio Station 43. Coordinates specified in the Echo Directive. The area was marked German-controlled, but as he advanced, something felt off. No German soldiers, no signs of combat, only fresh American jeep tracks. A few dozen meters from the station, Elias peered through his binoculars. 2 American soldiers in unmarked uniforms stood guard at the entrance. One smoked, his M1 rifle, bearing no serial number. The iron door of the radio station didn't carry German markings, but was embossed with property of U.S. Signal Corps. It hit him. This wasn't an enemy base, it was a disguised American operation. Elias pulled a small 16mm camera from his coat pocket. OSS orders allowed him to film all activity at the target, but no one mentioned the station was run by Americans. He started recording, slipping toward a partially open rear window. Inside was a large room filled with radio equipment, radar maps plastered across the walls, but what froze him was the scene before him. In the center, Colonel James Rains stood facing a German officer in Wehrmacht uniform, both speaking fluent German. Elias adjusted the focus, capturing every word. Rains' voice was clear, cold, and steady. After this, we split the radar data. No more war, just interests. Berlin or Washington, whoever controls the skies controls the future. The German officer replied, "My people will deliver the wave reflection formula. In return, you ensure our withdrawal, no pursuit." Rains nodded. "You have the word of the United States. This is someone else's war, not ours." Elias held his breath, filming the entire exchange. Before withdrawing, he noticed a large envelope on a table labeled Thorn evidence. He realized Rains knew about his earlier report on German officer contact, and now, Rains was setting him up as a traitor. Elias slipped out, circling back to the southern woods. He switched on his handheld radio, calling the command frequency. "Echo to command. Repeat, echo to command. Target is not German. Our people are inside. Need immediate confirmation." No response, only heavy static. Then a low male voice cut through. "Directive R-17 approved. Maintain silence." Elias froze. It was Rain's voice. He knew he'd been erased from the living. Footsteps pounded behind him. 3 figures in American uniforms charged forward. "Drop your weapon, Thorn," one shouted. Elias recognized Corporal Reed, who'd fought beside him at Point du Hoc. "Reed, what are you doing here?" "Rain's orders. You're under arrest for treason." "Treason?" Elias yelled. "I saw him talking to a German officer. Open your eyes, they're betraying us all." Reed's voice was emotionless. "You heard wrong. Hand over the film, that's an order." Elias slipped the camera behind his back, removed the film, and tucked it into his inner pocket. He keyed the radio again, voice urgent. Objective compromised. Friendly betrayal. A shot rang out. A bullet grazed his shoulder, knocking him down. Reed approached, rifle aimed, eyes cold. "I'm sorry, Elias," he said. "This isn't our mission anymore." Elias slashed Reed's leg with his dagger, rolled down a slope, and stumbled into a ditch as gunfire followed. He ran toward the coast, blood soaking his uniform. In the distance, 2 more soldiers in unmarked U.S. uniforms pursued, one speaking into a radio. As a plane roared overhead, he dove into an old technical bunker, Echo Bunker, later buried. He stuffed the film and radio into a steel pipe, scrawled on a piece of wood, "Do not trust command." He carved the same words into his M1 Carbine stock. Outside, footsteps stopped at the bunker entrance. Reed's voice, slightly trembling. "He's hiding down there." Another voice replied, "Orders are no traces. Bury the bunker. End it here." An explosion shook the ground. Dirt and rock collapsed, darkness swallowing the light. Elias crawled toward an auxiliary exit, gasping, blood pouring from his shoulder, radio still in hand. He pressed transmit, his final words cutting through the night. Mission complete. Friendly fire, not German. A single gunshot echoed in the woods. Corporal Reed stared at his old comrade's body, face pale. Behind him, Rains emerged, Colt .45 still smoking. "Good work, Corporal," he said, voice steady. He served his country to the end. Rains knelt, took the radio reel from Elias's hand, and turned to the other two soldiers. "Bury him here. No records, no reports. Echo Directive ends now." That night, Echo Bunker was sealed with explosives, covered in thick sand and concrete, the very site where, 47 years later, an M1 Carbine with a warning would be found. Reed, the only survivor who knew the truth, was reassigned to the U.S. within 2 weeks, his file noting, mental instability post-campaign. No one knew what he carried, except a recurring nightmare. Elias's radio voice before death, "Friendly fire, not German." Marion Cole found Orin Thorn at a small café near Gare de Lyon, where he was preparing to leave France. She introduced herself quickly. "I'm a freelance reporter, wrote for The Atlantic. I know you're investigating Elias Thorn." Orin froze, gripping his coffee cup. She continued, "I've been tracking Rains for 7 years. I have documents you need to see before they get to you." She placed a thick cord-bound file on the table, labeled Operation EHO Fort, OSS Classified. Orin opened it, revealing copies of 1944 telegrams, stamped with OSS secrecy seals. The first line stopped his breath. Subject: EHO Fort Installation, Vierville Sector. Purpose: exchange of radar data and jet propulsion with selected German officers. A handwritten note in the margin: disguised German communications post. Marion pointed to an attached map, Vierville-sur-Mer, with the radio station Elias infiltrated circled in red. A clear note: Operational Control, OSS Sector 7, Commander Colonel J. Rains. No enemy-held markings. "See," she said, "that area was never German territory. It was an OSS base disguised as a German outpost for military tech negotiations. Thorn didn't infiltrate an enemy base. He stumbled into our own." Orin sat silent. "He was killed for seeing something that wasn't supposed to exist," Marion whispered. "I found Operation EHO Fort in the 1946 War Investigation Committee files, but it was pulled from archives 2 days later. No one dared touch Rains. Post-war he was promoted to general and oversaw Operation Paperclip." Orin flipped through the pages. A telegram signed by Major Elias Rains, dated June 5, 1944. "Meeting with Lieutenant Colonel von Behrens confirmed. German radar prototype and Me-262 schematics to be secured under joint custody. Thorn team unaware of true objective." She said, "Rains orchestrated everything. He used Ranger units as a cover for OSS deals with German engineers. When Thorn filmed, he became a threat." Orin asked, "How did you get these documents?" Marion replied bluntly, "A CIA contact gave them to me last year. He said only 2 copies remain, one in Fort Rains' vault, the other in my hands." She paused, eyes wary. "Did you know Elias Thorn sent an internal report? I have a copy of a photo, an envelope labeled, E. Thorn Evidence." "That's it." Marion nodded. "That report went straight to Rains. He signed a contain exposures order the same day. OSS eliminated him and called it a failed mission." Orin opened his laptop, cross-referencing her map with U.S. military radar station records. Result: Vierville wasn't listed as German-occupied in 1944. The Wehrmacht's 352nd Division report noted, "No German presence there." The German radio station myth was a facade. Marion pulled out a black-and-white photo, the radio station with a German flag outside, but a small U.S. Signal Corps property sign on the antenna. "This was taken by the French after the war," she said. "They thought it was a recaptured German base, but Americans built it back in May." Orin turned to the file's final page, a classified report titled, Post-Operation Containment, EHO Fort. Brief content: 3 Ranger casualties classified as MIA. Facility dismantled. All witnesses reassigned or neutralized under Directive R-17. Command oversight transferred to Fort Rains. He reread neutralized under Directive R-17. That was the order that killed Elias. Rains called R-17 a security measure, Marion said, but it was a kill list. Anyone tied to EHO Fort outside OSS was eliminated. Thorn hail, even Reed. I have Reed's 1946 psych report, unstable nightmares about radio, refused to testify. 2 months later he killed himself. Orin asked, what about the Germans in the deal? Evacuated to the U.S. in 1945 under paperclip, worked for Bell and Lockheed. One of them, Dr. von Behrens, was the officer Thorn filmed. Rains protected them for life. She leaned back, voice slow. You know the scariest part, Fort Rains still exists, and OSS projects became the Defense Department's Strategic Signals Program. The R-17 code is still used for top-secret files. They're carrying on Rains' legacy. Orin stared at the documents, the story coming full circle. Elias didn't die in a failed mission, but was killed to silence a deal between U.S. intelligence and Germans before the war ended. He said, I have a recording of Rains ordering eliminate witness. Now we have a second piece of evidence, the R-17 order on paper. Marion nodded, but to prove it, you need to get into Fort Rains. That's where the original files, film and post-war reports are. I have a Defense Department contact who can get you in, but we only have one shot. Before leaving the cafe, Marion left a small note on the table, R-17 = regulator 17, internal termination unit. Rains didn't just order Elias's death, he founded the secret execution team. As Orin stepped outside, he noticed 2 men in a black car across the street staring at them. Marion whispered, not turning, don't stop, if they follow, R-17 is still alive. Orin replied softly, and this time we'll make it disappear. That night, Normandy's sea breeze cut like metal. Orin and Marion drove Luce's old Jeep down a dirt road toward northern Vierville-sur-Mer, where the OSS map marked etched bunker. The moon was hidden, only their flashlight cutting through wet grass. They stopped at the forest edge, where Elias Thorn was buried with his M1 Carbine. No one's entered since the French government sealed it, Marion whispered, but I have the key. A steel door covered by cracked concrete bore old weld marks. Marion used a cutting torch, blue flames sparking. When the steel fell, the smell of burnt metal and damp earth flooded out. They entered, a narrow corridor, over 10 meters deep. The flashlight revealed chalk markings on the walls. Omega, RAR-7, Echo. After the first turn, Marion stopped. Hear that? In the dark, dripping water, and the stench of decay. A few meters further, the light hit 3 bodies stacked together, in unmarked U.S. uniforms. Helmets still on, faces decomposed. One wore an armband with faded text. R-17. Marion handed Orin a camera. He photographed every angle. These are recent, maybe a few years, he said. Skin still intact. Boots are 1980s NATO issue. Not wartime bodies, and not French. Marion added. They came after us. Someone from R-17 returned to this bunker. They examined a large body, its coat bearing a small steel badge, a star encircling an R. Orin pulled out a dented metal tag, U.S. Army Archive card, number 1047B Vierville-sur-Mer, Operation Vault sealed, September 12, 1947. On the back, a stamp, U.S. Army Ordnance Command. Marion read softly. They came back after the war to seal the bunker, and maybe they, or their team, died here. Orin scanned the room. Near a collapsed wall were tire tracks and steel drag marks, identical to those he'd seen excavating the M1 Carbine. A large container had been removed. If Rains wanted to bury evidence, Orin said, this was the place. Marion found a leather wallet in one body's pocket. Inside was a small photo, James Rains in OSS uniform, smiling, holding a glass. On the back, shaky handwriting, forgive me, Elias. Orin stared, face rigid. He felt remorse. Marion replied softly, or wanted someone to know he once had a conscience. But why is this in someone else's wallet? Orin flipped the wallet. A faded ID. Robert C. Reed, Corporal, 2nd Ranger Battalion. He looked up. Reed, the one who shot Elias. Marion froze. So he survived, came back here, and died where he killed his friend. Orin gloved, opened a second wallet. Inside was a U.S. military certificate, signed Major Thomas Griggs, Department of Defense, active in 1983. No date of death. This guy's from a later generation, Orin said. They were still sending people to check this bunker 40 years after the war. They moved deeper to the bunker's core. Another iron door, locked with an old padlock, bore bullet marks around the edges. Marion pried it open with a crowbar. Inside was a small room, rotted furniture, a hanging ceiling lamp. On the wall, a rusted metal sign, half faded, HO Fort Control, property of OSS Sector 7. Orin's light hit the floor. Piles of decayed documents, carbon paper, torn film reels. He picked up a yellowed report titled Post-War Material Containment, September 1947. It read all remaining evidence of joint OSS, Wehrmacht radar exchange, to be sealed in Container 17. Witnesses disposed under R17 facility permanently sealed. Marion's hand trembled. This is the official order confirming Rains and OSS collaborated with Germans and killed everyone who knew, Orin said. Suddenly, a noise from the bunker entrance, falling rocks, a flashlight beam sweeping across. They doused their light, hiding behind a rusted table. 3 figures entered, speaking English, voices commanding, check the west sector, eliminate anything if you find artifacts. Orin gripped Marion's hand, signaling silence. As a beam swept the room, he saw their shoulder patches. DoD security, Fort Rains. One soldier approached, spotting a film reel Marion had dropped. As he bent to pick it up, Orin sprang, striking his throat, and grabbing his gun. A shot rang out, lights flashed. The other 2 fired back, bullets ricocheting off walls. Marion threw a smoke grenade, pulling Orin toward the corridor. They ran past the bodies, smoke thick. Outside, the sea wind howled, sand swirling. Orin sealed the bunker, replacing the steel plate, and they crawled up the hill. Below, flashlight beams faded. At the forest's edge, they stopped, panting. Marion checked her bag, holding the 1947 archive tag and the Forgive Me Elias photo. This is enough to shatter the OSS clean myth, she said. Orin nodded, wiping sweat. But we're not done. Fort Rains is the center of it all. If they sent people here, they know we're digging. She glanced back at the faint bunker lights. Those 3 bodies, Reed Griggs, and the R-17 soldier, they all died for the same thing, to bury or unearth this secret. Elias Thorn was killed to stay silent. Rains died a hero. Now history's digging up its own corpse. Orin clutched the photo. The shaky Forgive Me Elias bled under moonlight. A confession from HO Fort's last survivor. He whispered, forgiveness, no, but at least he won't be forgotten now. They returned to the jeep, starting it in the dark. In Normandy's wind, waves crashed, echoing 1944, where a young ranger's final words rang friendly fire, not German. Now that truth had resurfaced. 2 days after escaping Echo Bunker, Orin and Marion hid in an old inn near Le Havre. News of the 3 bodies in the bunker hadn't appeared on any broadcast, meaning Fort Rains forces had cleaned it up themselves. In the room, Marion sat at the table, flipping through old documents she'd taken from a Paris press archive. There's something we missed, she said. R-17 isn't just a code, it's an entire operation unit called Cleaner Division. She slid an OSS memo dated 1945 toward Orin, stamped declassified, restricted circulation. The title, Cleaner Division. Post-conflict asset control program purpose, removal, neutralization and concealment of sensitive wartime operations deemed compromising to U.S. strategic image. Below a personnel list, Major James Rains, Commander OSS Sector 7 Sergeant John Mercer, Logistics and Field Disposal Corporal Robert C. Reed. Enforcement Unit Orin read to the last line and froze. Mercer, the man who'd warned him in Washington, was one of the cleaners. He wasn't just a witness, he'd cleaned up the traces of Elias's killing. And Reed, whose name appeared in the diary, the photo, and the body in the bunker. No way, Orin said. Reed's dead. I saw his wallet on the body. Marion opened her laptop and plugged in a USB. That death record from 1947 has no medical certification. I ran a trace on veteran insurance. She turned the screen to Orin, a file under the name Charles Donovan, born 1919, OSS veteran, currently residing at Havenbrook Veterans Home, Pennsylvania. The final note, special pension, code R17. See, R17 is still an active code, Marion said. Donovan is Reed. He changed his name right after Echo Bunker was sealed. Orin narrowed his eyes, so he lived another half-century, and was protected. Exactly. I cross-checked Donovan's fingerprints in the welfare records. They matched the sample in Sergeant Hale's notebook. No mistake. Orin leaned back in his chair. A man who killed his teammate, then lived comfortably as a veteran. If he's still lucid, he might know the whole story. Marion replied, her voice cold, and he might be the only one who knows how Rains died, or if he's even dead. She pulled out another file. Cleaner Division had a final report, dated 1947, objective etched fort completed. Remaining operatives reassigned under civilian covers. Commander Rains transferred to Signal Research Command, Fort Rains, Maryland. In handwritten notes, Agent Reed to remain in standby status, case closed upon natural expiration. Marion frowned. Natural expiration means they didn't let him die publicly, kept him alive, isolated, until no one remembered. Orin stood and walked to the window, looking out at the harbor. If Reed's still alive, he's the last link. But why is he in Pennsylvania, right by Fort Rains? Marion answered, maybe they kept him close to monitor him, or maybe he never left the program. They decided to verify. Marion called a contact at the Veterans Administration, posing as a reporter writing a series on living D-Day witnesses. Hours later she received a fax confirmation. Charles Donovan, 95, was under care at Havenbrook Veterans Home, Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. Medical note, heart condition, mild dementia, restricted contact. Legal guardian, the Rains Foundation for Veterans Affairs. Orin read the last line, frowning. Rains Foundation, a charity founded by whom? Marion opened a file, established by the Department of Defense in 1973, named to honor General Rains, and they're funding the very man who was on his team. They exchanged a look, both understanding what it meant. The cleaner program never ended. It just rebranded as a civilian front. Orin packed his bags. I'm going to Pennsylvania. Marion asked, what are you going to do if you meet him? I don't need a confession, just confirmation that Rains ordered Thorn's execution, and that Cleaner Division is real. She nodded, but her voice slowed. You know he killed Elias. If he remembers, he'll kill you without hesitation. Orin replied, if he survived 70 years to cover this up, he knows this day was coming. Before leaving, Marion handed him another old file, found in a declassified CIA report, a 1963 photo from a veterans conference. In the front row was a silver-haired man with glasses, name tag, Charles Donovan. Next to him, a signed guest speaker, OSS Veterans Association. At the row's end, a small logo, R-17, Fort Rains. He wasn't hiding, Marion said, he lived openly, but no one knew who he'd been. Orin stared at the photo, the dim lamplight reflecting the aged but recognizable eyes, those of the man who'd aimed a gun at Elias Thorn in Normandy. As Orin left France, Marion sent him a short fax. Reed isn't just alive, he's protected. Be careful, Cleaner Division still has active operatives. On the flight to the U.S., Orin reopened the Cleaner Division personnel list, pausing at the three names, Rains, Reed, Mercer. Rains, the one who gave the orders. Mercer, the one who cleaned up and was killed after talking. Reed, the enforcer, surviving to this day. He scribbled in the margin, 2 dead, 1 left. The last one holds the secret. Outside the plane window, dawn broke through the clouds, light glinting off Orin's folded metal. The old Rains photo found in the bunker, inscribed, "Forgive me, Elias." He whispered, "No, he doesn't get forgiveness, but Reed will spill everything before he dies for real." The plane crossed into U.S. airspace, and below Pennsylvania glowed peacefully, where in a nursing home, the last survivor of Cleaner Division breathed slowly, carrying the secret of World War II's greatest betrayal. Orin Thorn arrived at Havenbrook Veterans Home on a damp, gray Pennsylvania morning. The nursing home, far from town, was unusually heavily guarded for a veterans facility. The sign outside reading, "Sponsored by Rains Foundation," sent a chill through him. In his hand was a forged press pass for interviewing D-Day witnesses, the only ticket to meet the man once called Corporal Robert C. Reed. The duty nurse led him to the basement, where Charles Donovan was under care. The small room held only the beep of a heart monitor and weak yellow light. The man on the bed was gaunt, skin like parchment, but his gray eyes shone strangely bright. When Orin said Elias Thorn, those eyes froze, then slowly curled into a crooked smile. "You his kin, grandson," Orin replied. "I'm here because he never got an answer." Reed was silent for a long time. Finally his voice rasped, "So he had a survivor too. I've been waiting for his family for 50 years. Orin sat by the bed. "You were in Normandy. You were with Echo Team." Reed nodded faintly. "Me and Elias, same platoon. At first I thought the mission was legit, take out a German radio post. But when I saw American soldiers guarding it, I knew something was wrong. Rains ordered us to seize Elias, said he'd betrayed us, leaked positions to the Germans. Orin showed him the 1944 photo of Rains shaking hands with a Wehrmacht officer. He spoke German, Orin said. Elias filmed it. Reed stared at the photo, eyes cloudy, hands trembling. I know, I was there when Rains got the contain exposures order. He coughed, gripping Orin's hand. Rains told me to shoot Elias. Don't let him say another word, he said. But I didn't. I couldn't. Who shot him? Reed closed his eyes. Some R-17 guy, I don't know his name. He fired when Elias ran. The bullet only grazed his shoulder. Elias was alive. I pretended to check the body. Told the team mission complete. Rains bought it. That night, I went back to Echo Bunker. Dug him up. He was still breathing, bleeding bad but conscious. Elias gave me an envelope and said, "Hide it, Reed. Don't let them have it." Then he passed out. I couldn't save him. I buried him by his M1, with that letter. Orin held his breath. Did you keep the envelope? Reed nodded weakly, pointing to a small wooden cabinet by the bed. In their little wooden box. I opened it once. Never again. I was afraid they'd come for me. Orin opened the cabinet, pulling out an old wooden box tied with string, carved on the lid. Inside was a carefully folded paper, ink faded but legible. A short note in Elias Thorn's shaky hand. If anyone reads this, tell Margaret, the betrayal didn't come from the Germans. Below, a signature and a blood-stained fingerprint. Orin's hands shook as he read. How long have you kept this? 47 years, Reed replied, voice fading. I thought Rains would come kill me, but he never did. Maybe they needed me alive to keep the story a combat accident. I lived with it every day. He looked straight at Orin. Rains thought hiding secrets was patriotic. But Elias knew something else, that truth is a duty too. You might think me a coward, but at least I didn't pull the trigger. Orin nodded. You saved him from being erased completely. And now you've just saved history. Reed gave a faint smile, eyes clouding. I just hope you get that letter where it belongs. I will, Orin promised. A moment later, the doctor knocked, signaling visiting hours were over. Orin shook Reed's hand one last time. If there's anything you haven't said, Reed cut him off, voice hoarse. There is. Fort Rains, 2nd sublevel. They still keep the film Elias shot. If you find the cabinet marked Omega Notpa 7, that's where he lives on in the reels. Orin memorized every word. The old man looked at him long, then whispered, now I can sleep. Orin left the home at dusk. As his car pulled out, a black Lincoln drove past, 2 men in suits stepping out. One wore a Rains Foundation badge. The next morning, Marion called from Washington, voice panicked. Orin, I just heard. Reed died last night. Orin stopped the car mid-road. What? They say he had a stroke in his sleep, but I got a copy of an internal coroner's report. Real cause neurotoxin injection in the bloodstream. No needle marks, means an endovascular device, the kind only special military medics have. Orin went silent. He looked at the wooden box on the passenger seat, still holding Elias's letter. They don't let anyone live long enough to tell the whole story. Marion replied, you need to get out of there now. If they killed Reed, they know what you're holding. Before hanging up, Orin glanced out the window. The black Lincoln from yesterday was parked a few hundred meters away, 2 men still inside. He knew time was running out. The morning after Reed's death, Orin went to the local post office to pick up mail. Among the envelopes was a small package with no sender address, postmarked Switzerland. Inside was a metal key engraved with 447Z, and a folded note with typed text. Zurich, Banque du Rhône. Vault open 1944, name E.T. Holdings. Orin stood frozen. E.T. Elias Thorn's initials. He called Marion in Washington. She listened, then said, if that's real, you're holding the key to a bank account Elias set up before he died. In 1944, only OSS and MI6 could open accounts under international code names. They used them for evidence, bribes, or top-secret data. She checked her system. Banque du Rhône still exists. Private bank, secretive clients, doesn't answer to the US or German governments. I have a contact there. Meet me in Zurich. 3 days later, they reunited at Cloton Airport. Marion wore a long coat, holding an envelope with a Swiss journalist's introduction letter. Orin kept the key in his inner pocket. As their taxi stopped before the granite building bearing the Banque du Rhône logo, founded 1891, they sat in silence. If this is really where Elias sent evidence, Marion whispered, this is the part both OSS and MI6 wanted buried deepest. Inside, a bank employee led them to the basement, where metal boxes lined the walls. When Orin showed the key, the manager hesitated, then nodded. This box was last opened in October 1944, registered to ET Holdings. No one else has access. He inserted the key and opened the vault. Inside, no money, just a leather-wrapped 16mm film canister, some typed documents, and a brass plate engraved, Directive Echo, property of OSS Sector 7. Marion opened the canister, labeled in handwritten ink, meeting, Vierville, the 5th of June 1944, recorded by E. Thorn. They borrowed the bank's small projection room to view it. The projector clattered to life. The image appeared, black and white, grainy but clear. It showed the room from the photo, a Normandy map on the table, a low-hanging lamp. Colonel James Rains sat across from a man in a German uniform, Lieutenant Colonel von Behrens, radar engineer. They shook hands, exchanged document bags. But behind them, in the frame's corner, a man in a dark suit, no uniform, stood silently watching. As he turned, light glinted off a badge on his collar, an MI6 crest. Marion gasped, "My God, that's not a German officer, that's a Brit." Orin stared at the screen, voice low, MI6 OSS and Germany in the same room. The film continued. Von Behrens presented schematics for the Me-262 jet. Rains nodded, signed an exchange memo, then spoke in German. "The deal takes effect post-Normandy. My men will transfer you safely to Station 43. You'll be protected as a prisoner of war." The MI6 man cut in. "Speaking English, London won't interfere as long as jet tech and radar data are split evenly. Post-war, they'll think we were just intelligence gatherers." Rains gave a cold laugh. "No more war, just interests." Elias, filming secretly from a back door, suddenly tilted the camera, the frame shaking. The lens panned to an envelope on the table, clearly marked E. Thorn evidence. Then a door creaked. A figure approached. The film ended in a blur, someone's hand reaching for the camera. The image flared and cut. The projection room fell silent. Marion stopped the machine, looking at Orin. "This evidence doesn't just indict Rains, it implicates Britain." MI6 knew, even collaborated. Orin replied, they needed to cover the deal. OSS protected Germans for tech, and MI6 played middleman. She flipped through the accompanying documents. Inside was a copy of Directive Echo, signed by Rains with a British liaison S. Hargreaves stamp. Marion opened her laptop, searching quickly. Simon Hargreaves, MI6 officer, went missing in 1946 flying over the North Sea. Rumors say the CIA sheltered him post-war. Orin turned to the final page, a handwritten note, in English, "To any who find this. The war never ended, it changed owners. Rains made me film this, but I kept a copy. If I disappear, this proves who betrayed us. E.T. June 1944. He folded the paper, voice low. He knew they'd come for him, and he still filmed, still left evidence." Marion nodded, eyes sad. "A loyal soldier thought truth was worth more than orders, and they called him a traitor." The bank employee knocked, signaling their time was up. Before leaving, Orin requested the vault be resealed, leaving a copied film behind. He carried the original in a moisture-proof bag. Outside the bank, Marion whispered, "If this film goes public, it'll shatter the D-Day myth. Not just America, Britain's hands are dirty too." Orin replied, "We won't release it yet. First we confirm the man in the film is Hargreaves, and see what Fort Rains is hiding on the second sub-level." She nodded, but her eyes flickered with worry. "You get it, Orin. MI6 won't let this slide. This isn't just about a missing soldier anymore. This is touching the foundation of two governments." Orin looked at the bank key in his hand, its cold steel reflecting his face. "Elias left this key for a reason. Now it's our turn to open the final door." In the distance, on Bahnhofstrasse, a black car trailed them slowly. Through the rearview mirror, Marion glimpsed the backseat passenger, gray suit, earpiece, eyes locked on them. "MI6 are worse. Rains Foundation." "Orin," she said, voice low, "we're not in safe territory anymore." He replied, eyes forward, "We haven't been safe since Elias hit record. What do you at Strickwide Bolt Bukolpo Fring you?" Marion Cole met an anonymous man at a small pub in Zurich's outskirts. He was in his late 80s, frail, hands trembling as he poured whiskey. Marion set a recorder on the table. "I just need confirmation," she said. "The man in the film behind Rains is Simon Hargreaves, MI6. The man stared at her for a long time, then nodded. "Yes, I worked under Hargreaves in 1944. He ran Project Lantern, a joint MI6 OS operation. Goal secured German radar data before the Russians got it." He sipped his drink, voice slow. "But when Thorn filmed, everything collapsed. Rains panicked, Hargreaves too. They called him a strategic risk. And you know," he looked straight into Marion's eyes, "every victory needs a few who know too much to be sacrificed." Marion gripped the chair. "You're talking about killing an American soldier who served in the same operation." He shrugged, eyes distant. "I was just a telegraph typist, but I remember one line from a classified June 1944 cable, subject E. Thorn. Eliminated under joint directive. Case closed by consent of both parties." The words chilled Marion. "Both the US and Britain signed off on killing him?" "Not just signed," he replied. "They split the tech and stayed silent. That was the price of victory." She turned off the recorder, tucking the tape into her bag. Before leaving, the old man added, almost a whisper, "Hargreaves didn't die. He changed his name, lived in Canada for a decade. Rumors say he later went to Washington as Rains's advisor." Marion left the pub, hands still shaking. That night, back at the hotel with Orin, she recounted the meeting. Orin listened, silent. If Hargreaves lived into the 50s, then MI6 knew exactly what Rains did with Echo Fort. They weren't just complicit, they were partners. Marion's phone rang. It was a contact from the British Foreign Office. "I don't know what you're doing in Zurich." His voice urgent, but the Ministry of Defense just sent an urgent request to all embassies. Immediate recovery of leaked national security documents. Code EO Fort. You and your colleague are on a watch list. Marion looked at Orin. "They know." She packed in 10 minutes, burning all printed film copies in the hotel fireplace. Orin kept the original in a metal case, strapped to his body. As they left the lobby, a man in a long coat stood at the front desk, eyes fixed on them. Orin recognized the gait instantly. Military, former operative. They hit the street, blending into the crowd. A light rain fell, street lights reflecting in long streaks. At an intersection, gunfire rang out. 3 sharp shots, hitting the glass wall behind them. Marion was thrown down, her body slamming the pavement. Orin crouched, pulling her behind a parked car. His hands were wet with blood, heart pounding. "Marion." She opened her eyes, gasping. The bullet had pierced her coat, but was stopped by the soft body armor underneath. "I'm fine," she rasped. "Not British. They shot American-style 3 rounds, tight group. MI6 doesn't use Colt M1911. Orin glanced across the street. The shooter retreated into an alley, face hidden, only a black raincoat and a professional grip on the gun visible. Orin gave chase, but at the street corner, only an abandoned motorcycle remained, with a U.S. diplomatic plate. Back with Marion, she sat against the wall, clutching her chest. "They know we have the film," she said. "And Rains Foundation sent people to clean up." Orin checked a wallet dropped at the scene. Inside was an ID from the Special Security Unit, Department of Defense, name Agent Cole Stanford, marked Fort Rains, Maryland. He looked at Marion. "Not the British. Our own country wants us dead." She gave a weak laugh. "Rains is gone, but his shadow lives. These guys are the new cleaner division." Orin pulled her up. "We can't stay in Zurich. I'll send the film through a secure channel to New York. If we disappear, at least the evidence survives." They took a taxi to the train station, rain lashing the windows. Marion kept the document bag on her lap, eyes scanning the road behind. At the station, they switched trains 3 times to lose any tail. Only after leaving Switzerland did Orin use a satellite phone to send an encrypted message to a Washington contact. "Fort Rains is cleaning house. Prepare to receive EO Fort package." Marion leaned back in her seat, voice low. "The man I met was right. Victory needs sacrifices of those who know too much. But they forgot. History has its own memory." Orin stared out the train window, lights blurring past. "Now we know why Elias died. Not to protect the country, but to protect a dirty deal." Marion gripped his hand. "Are you sure you want to keep going? They just tried to kill us, Orin. One more step is Fort Rains." "That's exactly why we have to go there," he replied, voice firm. "Reed's dead. Rains is dead, but the system's still alive. If we don't cut it at the root, more Eliases will be killed. She nodded, a faint smile breaking through. Then we end it, where it began. As the train crossed into Germany, Marion pulled out her phone, playing the MI6 veteran's recorded interview. The old man's voice crackled over the screech of wheels. Every victory needs a few who know too much to be sacrificed. She switched it off, eyes resolute. Not this time, she whispered. Behind their train car, a man read a newspaper, the page hiding half his face. At his feet, his shoes were caked with black mud, the kind only found around Fort Rains, Maryland. Normandy, June 8, 1944. No light, only the smell of damp earth and iron blood. Elias Thorn woke in the darkness of the Echo Fort bunker, hands bound with telephone wire, mouth parched, shoulder throbbing from a bullet wound. Beside him was his M1 Carbine, barrel stripped and tossed to the ground like a reminder, you've been erased. The bunker door swung open, a flashlight beam piercing his face. Colonel James Rains stepped in, his OSS coat caked in mud, voice cold and even. I didn't want to do this, Thorn. Elias looked up, eyes blazing with anger. You kill to cover your crimes, then call yourself a patriot. Rains went silent, scanning the bunker. 3 soldiers without insignia stood behind him. One of them, Corporal Reed, who had fought alongside Elias at Point du Hoc. Rains spoke, voice devoid of emotion. You know what's worse than the enemy, Thorn? A soldier who thinks justice outweighs orders. History needs the dead to stay silent. Elias gave a dry laugh, blood seeping from the corner of his mouth. Then you'll die with your lies, Rains. The air grew heavy. Rains signaled Reed, finish it. Reed hesitated. Sir, he was once, it's an order, Corporal, and remember, no body, no case. Reed gripped his gun, hands trembling. Elias locked eyes with him, no plea in his gaze. Reed, listen, they're selling this country to the Germans. You know it. Shut up, Reed whispered, voice breaking. I'm sorry. Rains turned, his tone final. Shoot. A gunshot rang out. Elias slumped, blood splattering the bunker wall. Rains glanced at the body, nodding to the other 2 soldiers. Bury him here. Seal the bunker. Leave nothing but sand and concrete. He walked out. Reed stood frozen, staring at a bloodstain on his uniform, then took a deep breath. As Rains left, Reed knelt to check. The bullet had only grazed Elias's temple, not pierced his skull. Elias was still breathing faintly. Damn it, Reed muttered. He knew calling for medics would get them both killed, but leaving Elias meant Rains would return to check. Reed dragged his friend's body to the wall, cutting the wire bindings. Elias opened his eyes, voice hoarse. You don't have to save me, just don't let them get the film. Reed trembled. I'll bury it. Elias shook his head. Bury me, with the evidence. If I die, at least the truth stays somewhere. Reed pulled the knife from Elias's belt, carving into the M1 stock. Do not trust command. He placed the rifle in Elias's hand. If someone finds it, they'll understand. He found a small iron tube, once used for cables. Elias, trembling, used his blood to write on the last page of his notebook. Rains met Germans at Station 43. This war isn't to win, it's to hide. He folded the notebook, stuffed it into the tube, and signaled Reed to seal it. Reed took a deep breath, aiming his gun at Elias. I'll shoot to fake it. The blood will convince them. Elias gave a weak smile. Thanks, at least you're still human. Reed pulled the trigger, the bullet tearing through Elias's shoulder, non-lethal. Elias collapsed, breath ragged. Reed piled dirt over half his friend's body, placed the M1 beside him, and covered it with sand. Turning away, he whispered, forgive me. Outside, Rains was signing a report. Done? Reed replied, forcing calm. Yes, sir. Nothing left. Rains nodded. Seal it. After today, Echo Division never existed. That night, 23:17, in the dark bunker, Elias stirred. Sand and earth pressed on his chest, his breathing faint. He crawled, blood oozing from his shoulder and head. The sun had long set, only distant wind audible. He flicked on the radio, but the battery was weak, the signal garbled. Mission, complete friendly fire, not German. The signal cut out. He stopped, gasping, opening his notebook one last time. In blood he wrote, if anyone reads this, tell Margaret, the betrayal didn't come from Germany. He set the pen down, closing his eyes. The sound of planes faded, sand falling into his hair. Morning, June 9, 1944. Raines returned with 2 OSS officers to inspect. Digging up part of the bunker, they found only dry earth, torn fabric, and dried blood. Done, Raines said. Bury it again. We have work in London. He paused, staring into the bunker's darkness. For a moment, it felt like someone was still there, watching. History will remember those who died for it, he muttered, and forget why. Reed stood behind, face pale. He knew Elias wasn't dead, knew he was still under the sand, clutching the M1 with its warning. But Reed stayed silent. Speaking meant signing his own death warrant. That night, as the OSS convoy left Normandy, Reed returned alone. He stood at the forest's edge, looking at the sealed bunker. He lingered until sunset, then whispered, "Rest easy, Elias. I'll keep your secret, until someone worthy hears it." 12 hours later, Elias was still faintly breathing beneath the earth. Rain poured, water seeping through cracks, soaking his wounds. He reached for the cold rifle stock, fingers caked in dirt and blood. His lips moved, barely audible, not German. As his final breath dissolved into the soil, the clock read 1904. Above, the rain washed away all traces of the execution, leaving only sand, steel, and a warning carved in wood. Do not trust command. 47 years later, when workers excavated, the M1 remained, steadfast as the final witness to a soldier, buried alive by his own nation. The dried blood in the iron tube, thought lost forever by Reed, would become the sole evidence, bringing Elias Thorn's name back to history, a belated echo of war's conscience. 2 weeks after the Zurich attack, Marion Cole returned to New York with a carefully backed-up 16mm film canister. The World News Service's lab, tucked in the basement, was reserved for veteran producers. The imaging engineer tested the reel on an old projector, a faint hum filling the room. The screen showed Raines in OSS uniform, shaking hands with German Lieutenant Colonel von Behrens. Both smiled, signing a memorandum, while behind them, a man with an MI6 badge quietly observed, holding a recorder. Marion didn't blink. The grainy footage was clear enough to see Raines's hand on an envelope marked E. Thorn Evidence. When the reel ended, the editor stood silent for seconds, then said, "If this is real, it'll blow up all of World War history." Marion replied, "It's real, and the man who filmed it was killed by his own allies to bury the truth." The International News Desk verified quickly. Raines's signature matched OSS archives. The face in the film matched Simon Hargreaves, an MI6 officer missing since 1946. Marion was clear, "We air it globally. No cuts, no excuses." That afternoon, 20 o'clock GMT, a special broadcast aired with the headline, "The Eco File, Allied Officer Executed for Exposing Secret Pact." The screen opened with the OSS logo, then cut to the original footage. The anchor stated, "Today World News Service reveals 1944 footage showing an American intelligence officer, Colonel James Raines, meeting and signing an agreement with a Nazi German officer, witnessed by an MI6 representative." The cameraman, Ranger Elias Thorn, was declared missing the same day. Within hours, global networks rebroadcast it. In Washington, the White House issued a statement verifying authenticity. In London, the British Foreign Office dismissed baseless allegations. But no one could deny the footage, shot on 16mm film, evidence impossible to fake with modern tech. Within 24 hours, headlines flooded. OSS trade with Nazi Germany, MI6 silence, on wartime pact, U.S. Ranger executed by Friendlies. In New York, Marion received dozens of calls, colleagues, lawyers, and threats. An anonymous email hit her inbox. "You've made a mistake. History is written by survivors. Don't join the dead." Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., Orin Thorn was surrounded. He stepped out of a hotel when 2 men in suits, flashing FBI badges, blocked his path. "Orin Thorn, yes, what's you're under arrest for violating the National Security Act. Right to silence applies now." They shoved him into a black SUV, no plates, heading straight to the outskirts. Orin sensed something off, too fast. No warrant, no full rights read. He asked, "Which office are you from?" The man in the front seat replied, not turning, "Special Division, Defense Intelligence." Orin's stomach sank. No FBI unit went by that name. He stayed quiet, watching through the window as the SUV turned toward an abandoned base south of Fort Meade. At the newsroom, Marion got a call from Special Agent K. Andrews, real FBI. Miss Cole, I heard your colleague was arrested. It wasn't us. Marion frowned. What do you mean? No warrant exists for Orin Thorn. Whoever has him isn't FBI. She stood up. Who are they? Maybe a private defense intelligence support unit. Unregistered, unmonitored, operated under Raines's orders in the 50s. Marion gripped the phone. They're going to kill him like Elias. Andrews' voice dropped. If they have him, it's not for questioning. It's to erase traces. She hung up, sprinting to the newsroom. Ramp up the broadcast. Keep looping it until they answer. If they kill Orin, the world will know who did it. In the SUV, Orin's head was hooded, and he heard an iron gate clang shut. They pulled him out, shoving him into a small room. Through the fabric, he caught a gravelly American voice, not German, not British. You think you're a hero, Thorn? You just dug up something, both governments buried in 1944. Raines is a symbol now, and you burned it. Orin replied dryly. Elias said the same, but he didn't die for a symbol, he died for the truth. A fist slammed into his gut. Truth doesn't save anyone, the voice said, it just kills fools. Before the hood tightened, Orin heard a radio outside, news airing the very film they wanted hidden. The footage confirms Raines's meeting with a German officer before the Normandy invasion. Neither Allied government has responded. One of the soldiers looked up, muttering, they aired it, globally. No stopping it now. The other snapped, shut up and finish this. The door burst open, blinding white light flooded in. A woman stepped forward, long coat, flashing a Justice Department badge. Thorn is under my custodial authority. The gravelly voiced man retorted, no such order. She threw down a printed sheet, voice firm, FBI special order, signed by the director's office. Kidnapping a U.S. citizen is a federal crime. Release him now. The two men exchanged glances, then backed off. When Orin's hood was removed, he saw Marion behind the woman, eyes still dark from sleepless nights. You didn't think I'd let them repeat 1944, did you? Orin coughed, sitting up. They know we have the film. Now the world does, Marion said. No hiding it anymore. Elias's story is out. That evening, WNS's next broadcast revealed who ordered Elias's execution. Raines MI6 and OSS in a joint agreement. Ranger Thorn was executed to protect a post-war deal. Both the US and UK launched internal investigations, but public outcry spiraled beyond control. Justice for Thorn, banners appeared on buildings, American veterans, demanding honor restored to the murdered soldier. In a safe room, Orin looked at Marion, saying softly, Elias has been seen, but they won't stop. Marion replied, voice resolute, neither will we. Orin was brought into a frigid interrogation room at Langley headquarters, Virginia. No handcuffs, but 4 cameras on the walls, and a two-way mirror reflecting white light. He sat there for over an hour before the door opened. A woman in her 50s, short hair, gray suit, stepped in. Her chest bore a badge. Deputy Director Sarah Coleman, CIA Counterintelligence Division. Mr. Thorn, Coleman said, her voice even and sharp as a razor. You've caused a national uproar. I want to hear it from your own mouth. Why? Orin looked at her, his gaze steady. I only brought the truth to light. Elias Thorn was killed for doing his duty. Coleman sat down, placing a thick file in front of her. You don't get it. Elias Thorn destroyed Operation Valkyrie, a plan to end the war early with a covert deal. 3 lives for millions. You call that a crime? Orin shot back, and in exchange for America's honor, Coleman gave a faint smile. Honor doesn't save civilians in Dresden or POWs in Ardennes. Valkyrie was designed to prevent those. Thorn intervened just as it was about to succeed. He found out Raines was making deals with the Germans. Orin said, that's not peace, it's a transaction. Coleman tilted her head. Transactions are how wars end. Elias didn't understand that. He thought he could keep his hands clean in a global war. But the real world doesn't work like propaganda films. Orin leaned forward. What about shooting him? Burying an American soldier alive? That's the plan. Coleman didn't flinch. Thorn was seen as a strategic threat. If he'd released that footage in 1944, the American public would have thought the government was colluding with Germany. The Anglo-American alliance would have collapsed. The Soviets would have taken all of Europe. Do you know how many would have died in the political panic? 3 lives for global stability. Rains understood that. Orin suppressed his anger. Rains understood how to rewrite history, not save lives. Coleman opened the file, sliding it toward him. Inside was a copy of Executive Order 1321, July 3, 1946, signed by Harry S. Truman. A handwritten note in the margin. All records pertaining to OSS Operation Echo, Valkyrie to be permanently sealed. Major James Rains commended for service beyond duty. Medal of Merit awarded posthumously. Orin stared at the paper, stunned. Truman knew? Coleman nodded. Every president since has known. They call it the scar that must be hidden. People like Rains were tools. When their job was done, they were erased. But this country wouldn't exist without those shadows. He gave a bitter laugh. Those shadows killed my grandfather. And now you want me to believe it was necessary? Coleman's voice remained even. I want you to understand that history has no room for naive heroes. Rains did what was needed. Thorn resisted. The consequences were inevitable. Necessary. Orin emphasized each word, is killing to protect an image. He didn't destroy Valkyrie. He destroyed the illusion that Americans don't compromise with devils. Coleman closed the file. You're right on one point. Devils do exist. But sometimes, to save the world, you have to sit at their table. Silence stretched. Only the hum of the cameras. Finally, Coleman said softly. Rains didn't disappear. He was moved to Signal Research Command, then helped lay the foundation for the CIA. Part of this very wall exists because of him. And Elias Thorn, though right, was the one who disrupted the foundation. Orin stood, hands on the table. And you're still protecting those foundations, aren't you? Even when they're built on innocent bodies. Coleman didn't react. You think you just saved your grandfather's honor? No. You've reopened a political wound, both nations buried for 75 years, and you'll bear the consequences. Orin looked straight into her eyes. I didn't save honor. I just gave the truth back. Coleman was silent for a few seconds, then gave a soft, humorless laugh. The truth is something people only love when it suits them. You think the public wants to know their allies once negotiated with Germany? They'll choose to believe Elias was a madman, and my job is to ensure that. She pressed a button on the table. 2 security officers entered. Take Mr. Thorn to the internal detention area. Orin didn't resist. As he passed her, he asked, do you ever wonder if Elias had stayed silent, the war would have ended, but what would we have become? Coleman didn't answer immediately. As he reached the door, she said softly, almost to herself, maybe because he spoke up we learned to hide better. The door slammed shut. In the room Coleman sat alone for a few minutes, then pulled an old photo from the file. Elias Thorn, 1943, smiling with his Ranger unit. On the back handwritten, not all wars end with peace. She folded the photo, slipped it into her pocket. You were right, Thorn, she whispered. But history doesn't need the righteous. It needs winners. Outside in the hallway, Orin was led through security. He glanced through a small window, seeing another room where a man in an old military uniform waited, a shadow from the OSS era. In that moment, he understood. Elias's war had never ended. It had only passed to the next generation. 2 days after the Langley interrogation, Marion Cole vanished from CIA communications systems. Internal reports listed her as under protection as a witness, but in reality, no journalist could find her. It wasn't until 72 hours later, when major networks simultaneously received an anonymous data package, that people knew Marion was still alive. The package was sent concurrently to BBC London, CNN Atlanta, and Al Jazeera International, encrypted with the digital signature, MC, accompanied by a single message, if I disappear, release this. It's the real history. The 18-minute video file, restored from Elias Thorn's original 16mm film shot in 1944, was fully intact. For the first time, the world saw the complete dialogue between Colonel James Rains, German Lieutenant Colonel von Behrens, and a third man in civilian clothes, MI6 agent Simon Hargreaves. The first half showed Rains, shaking hands with von Behrens, exchanging briefcases, but the second half was the real bombshell. The camera zoomed in, capturing Rains's voice, clear in fluent English. Roosevelt approved. OSS just executes. If the British agree, the war ends in 8 weeks. Germany surrenders conditionally, keeps its science, we split the rest. Hargreaves responded, London doesn't object, as long as radar and jet data are shared equally. Rains laughed, signing a document. History doesn't care who wins, only who survives to tell it. The film ended with Elias filming covertly behind a door, then shouts of discovery, the camera shaking, and the screen going black. When BBC and CNN aired it simultaneously, the world seemed to hold its breath. Within 30 minutes, breaking news flooded every platform. Secret Allied pact revealed. OSS Mi-6 and Nazi officers, in 1944 negotiation. American Ranger executed for exposing high-level collusion. In Washington, the White House was locked down. Congress convened an emergency joint congressional investigation committee. News outlets broadcast live footage of crowds outside, holding signs, Justice for Thorn, Reigns =sign traitor, who did Roosevelt protect? Within hours, the Department of Defense, CIA, and National Archives were ordered to declassify all records on Operation Echo Fort and Directive Valkyrie. A White House spokesperson said, "We are verifying the footage's authenticity. We cannot confirm that President Roosevelt approved the plan as mentioned, but the public wasn't waiting for confirmation." The video spread at an unprecedented rate, 24 million views in the first 12 hours, with German, French, and Japanese translations flooding the internet. On German television, historians confirmed that meeting aligns with intelligence reports of a secret American group negotiating with the Wehrmacht in the summer of 1944. In London, BBC aired a follow-up. Former MI6 agent confirms Hargreaves was seconded to OSS in May 1944, at Washington's request. Meanwhile, in Washington, Orin Thorn was held in solitary at a CIA facility. As the news played on a small screen in his cell, two guards exchanged panicked looks. Orin looked up, light reflecting through the door's slot. He heard the CNN anchor declare, in the footage, Reigns confirms the plan was directly approved by President Franklin D. Roosevelt. If true, this would be the highest-level cover-up in modern American history. Moments later, the cell door swung open. A security officer stepped in, saying quietly, "They want to see you, now." Outside, Deputy Director Coleman stood before a screen, the news broadcast lighting her face. As Orin approached, she didn't turn. "Did you know this would happen?" he asked. Coleman replied, her voice low but calm, "I thought we'd locked down all the data, but it seems your journalist friend is smarter than I gave her credit for. You're not going to arrest her?" Coleman sighed. "Can't, she's gone global. There's nothing left to hide." She turned, her eyes hardening. "Do you understand what Roosevelt approved means? It implicates the entire government, the whole system. If the public believes it, the foundation of trust collapses. We're trying to stop that." Orin replied, "And you call that protecting the country?" Coleman said softly, "No, it's stopping it from destroying itself." On the screen, Elias Thorn's image appeared, taken from the 1944 photo, his young face, eyes direct, with a caption below, "He died for truth." At Times Square, people lit candles, chanting Elias Thorn's name. In London, students flooded the streets, demanding a government apology for complicity. In Paris, French veterans scrawled on walls, "Thorn n'a pas trahi, il a vu." Thorn didn't betray, he saw. Coleman turned to Orin. "Do you know what they'll do to Roosevelt? They'll tear down his statues, demand schools be renamed, erase his legacy. Is that what you wanted?" Orin looked at her, voice calm. "I didn't want anything. I just wanted my grandfather to be called by his rightful name, the one betrayed." Meanwhile, in London, Marion stood on the top floor of the BBC building, looking down at a sea of candle-holding crowds. An editor approached. "You just broke the global broadcast record. 127 countries are airing that footage." Marion said simply, "It wasn't me. Elias did it from 1944. She sat down, opened her laptop. Her inbox was flooded. Thank yous, threats, promises to silence her like they did Thorn. She gave a faint smile, muttering to herself, "They tried to bury him for 47 years, now the whole world's digging him up at once." In Washington, morning papers ran bold headlines. Echo Fort, the day America betrayed itself. OSS deal with Nazis approved by President. And beside them, a photo of Elias Thorn in his Ranger beret, captioned, They made him disappear, but he returned through film. The higher system had been exposed, and the wave Marion unleashed was beyond anyone's control. 3 weeks after the footage aired globally, Congress convened a special hearing, investigation on Operation Echo 40. The packed room buzzed with reporters, live TV cameras trained on the witness stand. At the center, CIA Deputy Director Sarah Coleman sat upright, her face expressionless. Before her, a placard, "Witness under oath." The committee chairman began, "Ms. Coleman, the public has seen the footage Elias Thorn shot in 1944. Do you confirm its authenticity?" Coleman replied, voice steady, "Yes, the footage is authentic. It was stored in the OSS system before being transferred to the CIA's classified archives in 1947. The room erupted in murmurs. A senator snapped, "And why did the U.S. government keep this matter secret for nearly 8 decades? Coleman paused, then spoke clearly, "Because at the time, revealing the truth would have dismantled the Allied coalition. The war could have dragged on for years. The decision to eliminate Thorn was deemed a strategic necessity." Murmurs grew louder. The chairman banged his gavel. "Order." A female senator pressed, "Are you saying the U.S. government admits to executing one of its own officers?" Coleman took a deep breath. "Not officially. On record, Thorn went missing in action. But in reality, he was handled internally. And that order was approved at the highest level." A reporter in the back whispered, "Highest level, meaning the White House." Coleman didn't deny it. "Correct. President Roosevelt was informed. After the war, President Truman issued an executive order sealing all records, and posthumously awarded James Raines the Medal of Merit to obscure the matter's nature." The room fell silent, for seconds before erupting in reactions. Outside the Capitol, thousands gathered, holding signs, "Justice for Thorn. OSS betrayed its own. No victory built on murder." Meanwhile, at the White House, the sitting president, under immense pressure, prepared to address the nation. The live broadcast aired that evening. He stood at a podium, flanked by the American flag, and a photo of Elias Thorn in his Ranger uniform, eyes piercing the camera. "My fellow Americans," he said slowly, 75 years ago, an American soldier named Elias Thorn was erased from history for speaking the truth. He was branded a traitor for uncovering real betrayal." He paused, looking into the camera. "The United States government formally acknowledges that Elias Thorn was wrongfully executed during the war. We cannot justify that action, no matter the strategic context. No national interest is great enough to overshadow a soldier's honor." The nation fell silent. The president continued, "On behalf of the United States, I apologize to the Thorn family and all veterans who fought believing in the purity of our ideals. Tomorrow, Elias Thorn will be posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, and his name will be etched on the National Memorial Wall." In the front row, Orin Thorn sat beside Marion Cole, eyes red. As the announcer called Lieutenant Elias Thorn, U.S. Army Ranger, the entire congressional chamber stood, applauding ceaselessly. Marion looked at Orin, saying softly, "He's finally heard the apology." Orin replied, voice choked, "Not from those who killed him, but from the country he still believed in." The posthumous ceremony took place the next day at Arlington National Cemetery. An American flag draped a symbolic casket, beside it the original M1 Carbine, engraved with "Do Not Trust" command. As the president handed the medal to Orin, he said quietly, "We can't fix the past, but we can stop hiding it." That night, the Congressional Committee released an 800-page official investigation report, detailing Operation Echo 40 and Directive Valkyrie. The document was distributed to the press and posted publicly on the National Archives website. The final page, under Classified Appendix, Current Structure, read a single line, "R-17 still active." Next to it, a handwritten note from an investigator, "Elements of R-17 transitioned into post-war intelligence divisions. Current status unknown." Reading it, Orin froze. He asked Marion, "R-17 still active?" She nodded, voice low, "Part of it lives in today's intelligence agencies, maybe the CIA, maybe Defense Intelligence. People like Coleman are just the second generation." Orin closed his eyes, weary. "So Elias's war isn't really over?" Marion looked at him, voice grave. The truth rarely ends. It just changes form. The next day global headlines blared. U.S. admits execution of soldier who exposed Allied pact. Elias Thorn awarded Medal of Honor, 75 years late. R-17, the shadow that never died. As the world celebrated justice's victory, some independent reporters noticed the report's final detail: R-17 still active. They asked who's running it now. That night, in a quiet Langley office, Sarah Coleman signed her resignation. As she left, she glanced at an old plaque in the hallway, still bearing the OSS logo, R-17 Division. She paused, touching the worn bronze, and whispered, "History may apologize, but it never stops repeating." Across the hall, a young man in a dark suit picked up the file she left behind. On the cover's corner, a new handwritten note in blue ink: R-17 continues under new directive, authorization pending. The war Elias Thorn began in 1944, between truth and power, still had no end. Normandy. June 6, 1994. 50th anniversary of D-Day. The wind blew hard from the sea, carrying the smell of salt and cold mist. Thousands gathered on the sands of Omaha Beach, where blood had stained the ground 4 decades earlier. Above the cliffs, white gravestones stretched endlessly, reflecting the early sunlight. Among the crowd, Orin Thorn walked slowly, clutching a weathered wooden box containing his grandfather's M1 Carbine, etched with the scrawled words, "Do not trust command." He stopped before the main Ranger Force memorial, inscribed with the words, "For those who never came home." At the edge of the stone, Elias Thorn's name had been recarved just months before, its bright new lettering oddly vivid among the sun-faded names. Orin opened the box, carefully placing the M1 on the stone. His hands trembled slightly as he whispered, "Now you're home." A group of American veterans passed by, pausing to bow their heads. One recognized the M1, murmuring, "The rifle from Echo Fort." "We heard the stories." Orin only nodded, saying nothing. Near noon, he received a telegram from France. Sad news. Luc Durand, the last surviving resistance friend, had died the previous night at 83. In his will, he left Orin a sealed envelope sent long ago, open in Normandy. Orin sat on the stone steps near the memorial, opening the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, the script shaky but clear. "Orin, I've kept this secret for over half my life. It wasn't just Elias betrayed. My brother Henri was killed trying to warn the Allies about the meeting between Rains and the Germans. They called him a spy, but really, they feared witnesses, feared those like us who saw what shouldn't be seen. If you're reading this, the truth has been spoken. Elias died for what he believed, and I believe he won. But remember, those in the shadows never vanish. They just change names. Farewell, my friend, Luke." The paper was yellowed, but the final line remained bold, resolute. Orin folded the letter, looking out at the deep blue sea, peaceful to the point of irony. That afternoon, the ceremony began. The U.S. President gave a speech, mentioning the soldier Elias Thorn, who reminded us that loyalty doesn't mean silence. As the band played the national anthem, Orin stood still. He felt his grandfather beside him, quietly smiling among the white gravestones. After the ceremony, Marion Cole found him in the crowd. She wore a long coat, holding her newly published book, The Ranger Who Saw Too Much. "It's done," she said, handing him the first copy. 7 years to write it, and I'm still not sure the world's ready. Orin flipped through the opening pages, where a dedication read, "To Elias Thorn, who didn't stay silent before the truth." He skimmed the final chapter, Chapter 22, "The Circle Remains." Below it, Marion had included a black and white photo. "What's this?" he asked. She gave a faint smile. "A photo I got last week. No one knows who took it." The image showed Elias Thorn's memorial at Arlington, captured at night. In the misty background, a man in a long coat and fedora bowed, placing a silver laurel wreath on the grave. A ribbon on the wreath bore handwritten words, "For the ones who remember, R-17." Orin stared at the photo, silent for a long time. "You sure it's real?" "Taken by cemetery security. Infrared camera. 2 a.m., May 15th. No identification. None." Face completely obscured, she sat beside him, the sunset glowing over her shoulder. "R-17 is still out there, Orin. Maybe just a few. Maybe just a symbol. but someone in the shadows still sees themselves as keepers of historical balance. Orin closed the book, his gaze distant. Maybe they think they're doing the right thing, like Rains back then. Marion replied. Rains believed history needed the dead to stay silent. I believe every generation has the right to hear the truth. They fell silent. In the distance, the Normandy sea roared in the evening light, echoing 1944. That night, as attendees left, Orin stayed behind alone. He placed the M1 Carbine back on the stone, wiping the engraved words with a dust cloth. Do not trust command. The metal was cold under his hand, but the moonlight made the etching glow strangely, as if reflecting Elias's breath. He took Luke's letter, folded it, and tucked it into the rifle case. You both did your part, he said softly. We'll guard the rest. Marion approached, placing a hand on his shoulder. I think he'd be proud of you. Orin gave a faint smile. Or he'd say I'm crazy for taking on the CI. She laughed. If Elias were alive, he'd probably do the same. They looked out at the sea, where the sun sank below the horizon. A group of French veterans lit candles, their glow illuminating the white gravestones. The wind carried the distant sound of a ship's horn and waves, like the steady heartbeat of a memory that refused to sleep. Before leaving, Orin turned back one last time. In the moonlight, he glimpsed something glinting among the white stones, a silver laurel wreath, identical to the one in the book's final photo. Its ribbon fluttered, revealing the familiar words, R17. He said nothing. He just stood, watching for a long time, then nodded slightly, as if accepting that part of the darkness would always remain, impossible to erase, impossible to change, only to be observed, as Elias Thorn had done. As he left the beach, Orin glanced back once more. Waves crashed onto the sand, washing over the stone, bearing his grandfather's name, then receded, leaving faint white foam. The words "Do not trust command" gleamed one last time in the twilight. A warning from a century ago, still ringing true in a world of secrets that never truly ended. In 1995, a year after the D-Day 50th anniversary, Orin Thorn registered Vanish Files, a nonprofit based in Alexandria, Virginia. Its charter declared, investigate, reconstruct, and publicly disclose cases of missing persons from World War II regardless of nationality. The founding board included Marion Cole, media advisor, a military historian from the National Archives, and a former French gendarme who had worked with Luc Durand. A 24/7 tip mailbox accepted anonymous submissions. The website was stark 4 lines listing name, mission, evidence submission process, and legal contact. Vanish Files' first published case E-Show D01. Elias Thorn, U.S. Ranger, 1944. The file included authenticated original film, a blood-stained diary in an iron tube, the Forgive Me Elias photo, Luke's witness letter, congressional hearing transcripts, and a copy of the Truman-era sealing order. At the end, Orin added, status resolved, official apology, Medal of Honor awarded, R17 presence unresolved. The organization quickly became a haven for survivors' memories. A German sailor sent a diary about a train carrying scientists under a prisoner flag. A British nurse provided unnumbered medical records from a Cherbourg field hospital. A Canadian pilot's family submitted a map of a restricted zone, matching Sector 7. Each new case filled historical gaps, confirming a truth: Elias's story was not alone. One autumn morning, Vanish Files received a package with no return address, a brown envelope, postmarked from a Maryland suburb, with no cameras catching its drop-off. Inside, a thin wooden box wrapped in wax paper, sealed with old military tape. On the lid, faded handwritten words, for the Thorn family. Property seized 1947. Orin opened it formally, with Marion and a lawyer present. Inside was a cream-colored envelope, its OSS wax seal cracked, holding an old receipt. Evidence letter from P.T. E. Thorn, property impounded per Directive R17. The seal was partially erased, but R17 remained clear. Orin gloved, slit the edge. Thin, glossy paper, black ink still sharp. The first line was Elias's handwriting, swift and precise, written before leaving Echo's tunnel. If they kill me, let justice speak instead. The truth is the only enemy war cannot defeat. Below, 3 short lines, to Margaret. Don't believe what they say about me. Believe what I saw. Signed Elias. The bottom corner bore a blood-stained fingerprint, matching forensic records. Marion cross-checked the handwriting with the blood diary, perfect match. The lawyer notarized it. Vanish Files issued a press release, recovered final letter of PTE. Elias Thorn, seized 1947 under R-17, anonymously returned 1995. News outlets called immediately. One reporter asked, "Who sent it?" Orin answered per protocol, "Unknown." When asked, "Why now?" Marion said, "Maybe the keeper of the box grew old, or a descendant's conscience was strong enough." The letter was digitized, posted online with forensic analysis. The R-17 entry updated, possibly active as cultural financial shell entities, verification pending. Vanish Files expanded. They developed protocol spectral, source protection, multi-point submission, packet separation, conditional disclosure. They signed agreements with 3 European archives, creating a clean channel for those once silent to transfer documents. Each published case included a checklist falsification risk, measuring forgery probability. No sentimentality, no heroics, just evidence. In 1996, the U.S. Army Museum in Washington opened a new exhibit, E-Show Fort, A Ranger's Truth. At its center, Elias's M1 Carbine sat in a reinforced glass case, light focused on the stock's engraved words. Below, a brass plaque read, "Private Elias Thorn, Ranger Battalion, 1944, betrayed but not forgotten." To the left, a screen looped Elias's film clips, Rain's handshake with Von Behrens and Hargreaves, the "Forgive Me, Elias" photo, the Vierville, Sector 7 map. To the right, a slim shelf held a copy of the final letter. Visitors wore headsets for a brief narration. Echo Mission, Directive R-17, 1947 Sealing, 1991, Exhumation, 1994 Acknowledgement. At the opening, Orin guided veterans' families through each placard. A post-war veteran lingered before the letter, saying, as if confirming, "Short, but enough." A French woman photographed the plaque. Students asked Marion, "What's R-17?" She answered per public records, "A code, later a mechanism, now a shadow." That evening, the museum hosted a live radio reenactment of 1944 signals. As white noise crackled, the room fell silent. Then a restored tape played an old man's voice through the speakers. Echo secured, mission complete, lights dimmed, listeners stood still. Some touched the rifle's glass case, wordless. The next morning, museum staff added donor credit signs. In the left corner, a new plaque appeared quietly, white with black text, "Donated by the R-17 Foundation." The board said the foundation donated under unconditional terms. No address, no trustee list, just a forwarded phone line. IRS records showed, established 1973, renamed twice, tax-exempt filings complete, represented by a law firm once tied to the Defense Department, formally legitimate, substantively unclear. Orin got word from a guide. The foundation name appeared overnight. He visited, reading the plaque repeatedly. Marion called the museum's legal office, who approved. The reply, "Funds followed protocol, no content conditions, maintenance escrow included, no reason to decline." She asked, "Do you know what R-17 means?" A pause on the line. "We know what the press says, but it's a legal entity." Vanish Files posted a public note on museum credit lines and historic accountability. It avoided boycott calls or conspiracy spins, stating only organizations that once hid tracks may rebrand as memorial funds. Donations don't erase history. History is clean only when all truth is faced. That week, Orin received an unmarked envelope, left under Vanish Files' door at dawn. Inside, a faded photocopy, its header faint, R-17 disposition, cultural cover. The final line underlined, "Transition assets to foundation model, preserve narrative control." No signature, no date, only a handwritten note in slanted blue ink. "You got the letter, keep digging." He filed it under R-17, status updated, active as foundation shell, to be confirmed. Vanish Files launched 3 new cases. Case Vanish 02, Canadian pilot in Ardennes. Case Vanish 03, paperclip scientist ship via Cherbourg. Case Vanish 04, unnumbered medical camp in Bretagne. Standardized process, 3-person teams, investigation, forensics, media, each step independently verified. The Echo Fort lesson was printed large in the meeting room. No single piece of evidence stays in one place. No one person holds too much. By year's end, Marion released the paperback of The Ranger Who Saw Too Much. It included a photo appendix, the silver laurel wreath with the R-17 ribbon, placed at midnight in Arlington. The first print sold out in 2 weeks. On TV, she said, "This book isn't about one man, It's about a system that made him its enemy. Asked what's missing, she replied, the identity of the wreath layer. That winter, the museum updated the exhibit, an interactive screen. Who was there? Listing witnesses: Luke Durand, Sergeant Owen Hale, Corporal Reed, who verified the final letter, Marion Cole film discoverer, Orin Thorn record restorer. At the bottom, a faint line, anonymous donors within the system. No names, no numbers. One late evening in the empty exhibit hall, Orin stood before the M1's glass case. The restored radio signal played on loop, same as opening day. Echo secured, mission complete. The final sound lingered, fading into static, like a voice from another time. The light caught the stock's engraving, sharp as a blade. Do not trust command. He said nothing. He opened his notebook, adding a line to vanish files goals. Ensure no one is buried with their secrets again. Outside the Capitol was quiet. Inside history stood under glass, lit by lamps. In the exhibit's right corner, the small plaque remained untouched, donated by the R17 Foundation. A clear reminder: conspiracies can change faces, voices, file covers, but they're still here, hiding among memorial plaques, funding memory, keeping a hand on the narrative. Vanish Files logged this as a final footnote for case Echo 01. Elias Thorn's story rings as a very American reminder. Patriotism doesn't mean silence, and lasting trust comes only from verification. In today's U.S., as we debate national security, misinformation, and institutional power, the lesson lies in specifics. The do not trust command, etching on the M1 Carbine, doesn't endorse blind skepticism, but encourages civic duty. Question: verify, demand accountability. Orin wasn't alone. He built Vanish Files, establishing evidence chains, multi-site backups, conditional disclosure, a practical model for civil organizations, journalists, and historian communities, handling sensitive records. Marion didn't leak recklessly. She authenticated a 16mm film of Rains, shaking hands with a German officer with MI6 in the background, then released it across platforms to prevent suppression. A lesson in proactive transparency and digital safety backups. Simultaneous release. Source protection. Congress held hearings. The president apologized and awarded Elias a Medal of Honor. That's the American way. Correct, do it openly. By law. But the museums donated by the R17 Foundation, plaque, and the R17 Still Active report remind us that subtle influence can slip into memorial funds, museum scholarships. So support independent press, use FOIA, join school or museum community boards. Question funding sources. For veterans and families, keep records, digitize diaries, send copies to multiple archives. Don't let truth die for lack of keepers. And for every individual, practice cross-source verification. Don't share untraced claims, and know, as Elias wrote, the truth is the only enemy war cannot defeat. In America, truth needs backers. If you believe that the truth never dies, even when buried under the dust of history, click subscribe to join us in continuing to unlock the secrets still hidden behind the World War. Thank you for following the story of Elias Thorn, the soldier who was betrayed but not forgotten. See you in the next episode.